a matter of days. So my name's Steve Beaumont. I'm Technical Director at PowerONPlatforms, and we're heavily involved in the community aspect as well as obviously as personal business. So you can find us at the cloudoscommunity.com. It's actually currently undergoing some changes, so the website may be up and down at present. I've also got a personal blog at the aptly named systemcenter.ninja, and we do have various news feeds, events and activities that we announce via our corporate platform on PowerONPlatforms.com. Like I mentioned, my name's Steve Beaumont. I'm the Product Development Director for PowerONPlatforms, and for my sins I'm also a Microsoft MVP within the System Center Cloud and Data Center teams. I do have a Twitter handle if anyone wants to join me. And I'm also been lucky enough to work on some of the System Center cookbooks from PAC-T, covering Service Manager Orchestrator and the very, very recently announced Operations Manager cookbook, which should be available anytime from now. So who are PowerONPlatforms? Well, we were formed from a collection of industry veterans with many years of experience within both the industry in terms of providing services, as well as that operational and the in-depth architectural and deployment. Like I mentioned, we have literally written the book on System Center, both from myself and some of the other team members, and we refer to ourselves as being this IT management and cloud automation specialist. But it's very keen to point out that we are actually business-led, not technology-led. So we have focus around what the actual requirements for the businesses are, rather than just looking purely at the new and shiniest exciting features. So at PowerONPlatforms, we do have some very strong core focus areas. We talk about how we can actually help you deliver a cloud management platform. And it's basically split across these three main areas. What we call the digital data center, so doing that transformation from your traditional style data centers through to the private and the hybrid cloud environments. Enterprise device management, so obviously the story and the journey focuses right at the beginning on the actual end users and the devices they access and the different types. And of course, how we can actually help protect your environment and develop things like business continuity plans. We have a strong focus around aligning of your IT roadmaps to your business requirements. Like I mentioned, this idea of actually concentrating on the function versus the need of the actual technology. We have a range of deployment solutions, and it's part of what we'll talk around today, how these can actually help you, ranging from actual physical hardware appliances of System Center through to some of our automation and our deployment toolkits. And we have a very strong focus because we're not looking at the actual deployment anymore, what we say there's no inherent value in the deployment mechanisms, that we can actually help support your local teams and actually build on their knowledge and mentor them to help actually achieve the maximum value from the solutions that are implemented. So Microsoft have this concept or this vision around what they call the Cloud OS. So this sees Microsoft having three main key delivery or focus models of delivery of their different operating systems and their services. Be this either in the private cloud, transforming your data center to adopt some of the tendencies of the cloud methodologies, whole scalable and elasticity, utilizing the Windows Server platform, System Center for Management, and moving across into both the server provider model, these third-party external hosting companies that you can work with, and the actual Azure public cloud offerings that they have, from both the Azure platform into extensions such as Windows Intune and Office 365. Now this gives us a very single consistent platform across all these three different delivery mechanisms, but it means that we also have the same sorts of management technologies in the form of System Center across all three areas. And PowerONPlatforms can actually help deliver across all of these three areas to give you this hybrid cloud approach, regardless of whether it's on your own internal data centers, reaching out either into a third-party provider or cross into the public cloud. So I mentioned Microsoft System Center. This is Microsoft's management stack for their technologies that you use both in-house and in the public cloud. So if we take it from the approach of having both the aspects of the IT professional over on the right and our service users and our owners, them customers that we serve on the left-hand side, we start to look at having access to all three of them different delivery models that I mentioned, be it in the public cloud or in your internal data center. And we have that conscious awareness that there are multiple different devices now accessing the services that you provide. It's no longer just a user has a desktop on an actual desk that they access their main line of business application from. We're seeing more and more of this usage of mobile technologies and just being very much on the go accessing web services to actually provide the work that they deliver. So within the actual, what we have that terminology of the cloud management platform, it has to have a very strong focus on the self-service element. How can we actually start to adopt the principles that we're seeing with the likes of banks, the app stores from the different tablet manufacturers, to be able to offer services back down to our end users? So this is where the System Center platform starts to come into it. We have various different consoles that we can use to surface information to the end users. We have what's known as Windows Azure Pack, which is actually providing that Azure consistent look and feel within your internal data centers, ideal for service owners and developers that want to be able to consume some back-end infrastructure or develop more of that web services or web farm approach. App Controller is used as that hybrid cloud mechanism for deploying IIS infrastructure to both on-premise and up in Azure, as well as Service Manager for delivering that end-user type request offerings, and Configuration Manager for that App Store approach. Now, all of this is great on its own as just a console that we can present to the users or a web interface. However, if there's no substance behind what it is that we actually offer, then there's not much value to that benefit. So we talk about how we can actually model that service out and build it in to both what we call service delivery and automation. This is that idea of actually building up a service catalog of our offerings, both in terms of information that we want to collect, but also costings, SLAs wrapped around that, building on the CMDB that we find in Service Manager. So Service Manager is the core component of Microsoft in delivering that service desk approach to your organization. But it interacts very heavily with the orchestrator component that we use for doing what we call runbook automations, taking some of them tasks where we've got very defined information for now and being able to automate that process to reduce the actual impact on our internal teams and deliver a standardized model and a quick delivery model. Wrapping it around into the whole what we call lifecycle management, it's all right that we can actually push services to our end users, but also being able to use some of the other components that fall into this category for actually provisioning and configuring them services, and then closing the loop, because like I say, it's all right getting stuff out there, but we need to know its ongoing lifecycle management. So this brings in the rest of the System Center components that we'll talk about how to deploy and how to make it quicker. And that's Virtual Machine Manager for managing that sort of IaaS, Infrastructure as a Service platform, providing both virtual machines and, more importantly, scalable service templates where we can actually start to look at doing on-demand upscaling or downscaling of the provision services. Operations Manager helps us with that by being able to actually monitor what is happening, not only just at a server layer, but also across services and applications. So we actually start to monitor end-to-end, something like our payroll system, where we can see both the interaction of web clients, or not just web clients, but then synthetic transactions from end users to the system, the performance of the web tier, for example, any application services that might be running, right through to databases and the hardware layer. Configuration managers used primarily across desktops, but should also be focused around on the server side, helping us with baselining, patch management, and general configuration and inventory. And Data Protection Manager is that bit that gives us that overarching protection of our data, not just through a normal backup maintenance window, but more on a continuous data protection method, as well as helping us branch into different scenarios of data protection, such as pushing data to the cloud for that longer term retention period, rather than just purely archiving it out on tape. Now this is, like I mentioned before, what we refer to in its entirety as that cloud management platform, both an on-premise infrastructure and utilizing very common admin experiences to go across the different layers such as the public cloud and service providers. And again, extending it from your internal data center to interact with things like the Microsoft Azure platform as well as the Intune portal. So I've covered very briefly some of the top level components of System Center. As we saw, there are a fair few. So it's important to point out that the product within all this is System Center. There are individual components that live underneath System Center. And with the R2 introduction, we start to see even more coming along, such as the Service Provider Foundation, a new version of automation that's heavily based around PowerShell, which is service management automation, and service reporting to start to give us some of that chargeback mechanism or showback to see where exactly are our resources on a per tenant basis being used. Which also saw the introduction of the Windows Azure Pack. Like I mentioned before, this is that consistent look and feel across both the external Azure platform and the internal private cloud platform delivered via System Center using Windows Azure Pack. Now, there's a fair few components in here, and just to give you more of a breakdown, when you come to consider actually starting to look at deploying some of these, there's individual features and roles and different servers that are required within each one of these components. So the whole point of today that I want to start to show you is, as we build up, there is this traditional method, lots of different things to consider, and as we move forward throughout the webinar today, I'll start to show you how we can simplify some of this installation. So at the minute we have multiple different components of System Center, and each one of them has their different features and roles that need to be considered. Quite a few different things to consider right off the bat regarding the components that you require and what features and where they actually sit. Just to add to that though, there's also a massive load of prerequisites that are required for each one of these components. So we start to look around things like requiring .NET Framework. For any of you that have started to use Server 2012 some more, will appreciate how much of a pain it is these days to now have to add back in .NET Framework 3.5 every time you deploy the operating system, and just about all applications still require it. And then we start to add on some other things like the IIS features. In fact, we actually need to add a few more IIS features, so we'll add a few more of them in. Maybe some of the components like Config Manager or Virtual Machine Manager will need some of the Windows Update Services components. And then we might need a few more around either SQL 2008 for you and some of the legacy components. Definitely some SQL 2012 components are going to be needed. We need to consider which ones need the native clients, the command line utilities. Oh, and let's add a few more into the mix as well. So we're adding some chart controls, filter packs for SharePoint, definitely the VC++ runtimes. And before I run out of breath, I think basically you get the idea. It's a lot of different prerequisites that are needed, and these are all different per component, per feature, and per role. So you need to be able to actually sit down and work out which ones are required in the traditional manner. So talking about that, we can actually start to say one of the very first things that we need to do is look at how we define out, almost design our deployment. We need to understand which features, which components, and which features of them components are we going to require to actually deliver our System Center project. We need to decide where they're going to sit, what servers, what resources them servers require, what high availability options are needed, anything around service accounts, and so on and so on. So once we've done that exercise, because it doesn't matter which approach we take, we have to have that understanding of how it's all going to be strung together and what's required. We can start looking at actually downloading some of them bits I mentioned. So the installation media for System Center will come with a lot of it, but things like all the different SQL feature pack items, the SharePoint components, all need downloading, extracting, and manually getting ready. Once we've got some of them bits, we can look at actually deploying out some of our servers, making sure that the relevant operating system for the organization is deployed. And then we can get on some more tasks, creating some service accounts, logging on to each server, installing all of them prerequisites that I mentioned, getting SQL ready, installing it either as individual nodes on the relevant boxes or installing SQL clusters, which gives us more clusters to install, getting all the service account permissions in place, making sure that we install the first servers first. So certain System Center components have to have certain roles done first. For example, Service Manager, you need to get a management server up and running first before we deploy any additional roles. Then we can deploy the additional server roles, and then again go through granting admins right to the relevant components. We can start to look at integrating with different System Center components, get some System Center consoles installed, connect to some consoles, install some agents, and then finally start to manage something. But before we are able to actually start to manage something, there again is still some configuration tasks to do. Now these configuration tasks that I have on screen are in no particular order. They could be done differently depending on which component you're working on, but we still have some base configuration to do. Usually little things like setting up the notification channels and the templates so we can get email notifications. Definitely within Virtual Machine Manager, setting up logical networks, defining SLAs and Service Manager, the list goes on. So far, we've only been talking about a traditional manner to start to deploy this, as if you were sat in front of the console, starting to insert media, clicking next, next, next. There is a fair amount of effort, I think you can appreciate, to get to a stage where you can start using the product. So this is where we start to shift gears slightly. Moving away from traditionally sitting there, clicking next, next, next on different things, entering in usernames and passwords and trying to get it all strung together, to looking at how we can actually start to deliver it in a bit more faster manner and a lot simpler. So one of the first options that people will always defer to, and this is fairly well known about now, is something called the PowerShell Deployment Toolkit. So I did a session about this recently where I went into a lot more depth on this. I'm not going to today, I'm just going to mention it briefly as we talk about some of the ways and methods that PowerON can do it. So one of the primary things that we see the PowerShell Deployment Toolkit being used for is lab and proof of concepts. You can get some organizations that will utilize this to do more of a production infrastructure, but this is where they have more skills and the knowledge around that. Which is fair to say that even using a PowerShell Deployment Toolkit, you still need to have a good knowledge of System Center and its different interaction points. There's various XML files that you need to complete and configure in terms of the different options and choosing the different bits. So there still is that design or that define concept, and making sure that you have everything you need ready before you click go. However, it does speed up things like doing the download of all the different components that you need, the extracting of it, and then actually if you're using a Hyper-V environment, it will do some of the commissioning of the VMs and then the installation side, which does give you that bare bones installation and the base integration of some of the components, such as the interaction of the links between Virtual Machine Manager and Operations Manager, for example. And then you can start doing some more of the deeper configuration exercise. The other option is always going to be consultants. You can go out and you can find some of the best consultants that know the different components inside and out. But obviously there is the costs associated with that, along with still the time to deliver. They still are going to have that ramp-up time to be able to get the components installed, do them in the order that's required, and then start integrating and interacting with them. Sometimes they can still be very much toolset focused, and they get lost in the actual which components are the most compelling to deliver business and the ROI delivery back to your business. And then there is the PowerONPlatforms approach that I'll talk about, how we can actually increase the speed of delivery of this. As I was saying, we are very much business requirement focused, concentrating on where it makes the most sense to actually deliver them benefits back to your business in a very visible manner as well. When we talk about how we do very much that knowledge transfer, that mentoring approach, making sure that the skill sets, that the time saved between the actual implementation is now delivered, and we've kind of put the power back in the hands of your own IT teams. So it's more a case of your teams are delivering and driving the actual deployment, and how we very much increase that speed to return on investment. So PowerONPlatforms has a different portfolio of solutions. We do talk around how there are various fast tracks between each component. These are utilizing a different set of deployment technologies. These are not just the PowerShell Deployment Toolkit, and I'll explain that in a little bit later, and how we can build on them different offerings into a hardware appliance approach, which starts with the Azure Simple appliance, which wraps more the data center focused implementation of components into a hardware delivery offering. We call it the Azure Simple because there is that focus and that delivery mechanism for the Windows Azure pack, giving that Azure consistent look and feel within your data center and how you can then deploy services. There's the integrated ITSM, which is focused more on that back-end service delivery to our customers, focused around config manager and service manager and the automation aspect. And then with that top-level cloud management appliance, this is the easy way to deliver that cloud management platform that I mentioned within your organization in a very rapid manner. And these are all extensible by the various third-party expansion modules, be it Squared Up for dashboards that we work heavily with, CSN for more of that integrated ITSM appliance approach with the portals and HTML5, through to Veeam to give you that more in-depth monitoring of your VMware investments. So as I mentioned, the actual fast track packs, these are actually designed to, we still have that design element within them. So all of the System Center components, all of our fast tracks and the hardware appliance require that fully detailed design workshop to be completed. We go through and we learn about your environment and work out more so on the aspects of where the secondary management infrastructure is required. The deployment is done through an automated toolset where it can rapidly deploy not only the base configuration, but as I'll explain later, some rich value enhancements such as extra management packs, extra applications that we can deliver on top of it. And then it's that enablement side, actually training from both a bootcamp perspective as well as a mentoring hands-on unique to your environment. We have the different fast tracks across the various different components. As mentioned before, we have that hardware appliance stance as well. So moving right up to the very top, because the other two appliances are basically amalgamations of the fast tracks within a hardware with the integration pieces, whereas the cloud management appliance is that fully configured, unique, disparate from your existing infrastructure, bringing in what we call the fabric management layer to your infrastructure. So if something was to go wrong within your production environment, we have a platform with the tool sets still capable to actually root cause diagnose the issues to get you back up and running as quick as possible. And all this is built to Microsoft reference architecture, bringing in all of the different System Center components and actually adding the value-added functions that I'll explain in a minute. So we talk about from a capabilities perspective, going back to that very first slide that I presented, where we have that approach of the end users and how they consume services. So we have within the CMA this Windows Azure pack for a tenant and an admin portal infrastructure focus, being able to consume services based on plans, as well as having that service management API for other organizations to be able to connect back into you as you offer services out, along with an actual user request portal driven through System Center and either the out-of-box extensions or things like the CSM portals, right through to the App Store portals that we see within Configuration Manager, for example. So we have all of the System Center components deployed in a highly available manner to reference architecture alongside some actual core infrastructure components as well. So we deliver this in a domain trust model where it has its own fabric management control, its own domain controllers, its own certificate servers, its own highly available SQL servers, for example, with the System Center components that then reach back into your environment and manage it. So this is all built heavily on the Hyper-V virtualization platform with that highly resilient compute infrastructure in the hardware side. So we have multiple different compute nodes within the platform, tiered storage to provide the IOPS that are required, as well as integrated networking alongside of it, making it a very self-contained, highly available, redundant hardware platform. So how quick is quick? Well, as an example of one of the fast tracks we did recently, this was a tweet that Phil Mercer, our Solution Services Director, sent out. We actually managed to complete it in 1 hour, 6 minutes, 19 seconds. This was for 12,000 seat config manager production ready deployment. This was utilizing the fast track that not only installed the base infrastructure, but also configured it fully, added extra applications into it with configuration, different collections, with all the settings ready, so we could actually start to utilize the platform for deploying things out like the Operations Manager console for another component that they were utilizing right from the outset. In another example, if we look at the actual CMA implementation, because this is that hardware-based infrastructure model, it is as simply as 3, unpack the box, 2, rack it within your environment, and 1, we turn it on. Obviously then we establish the trust within your organization, but from that point onwards we are ready to actually start utilizing System Center to manage. So if we talk about all them steps that were previously involved, going through and doing that design element, downloading the bits and so on and so on, until I run out of breath, we tend to talk about bringing the speed of this right back down to almost 4 steps. We look at doing the defining your deployment, so how do we do the design, documenting that, capturing all of your requirements. The deployment is automated, which leaves us to basically start pushing out agents to start managing your infrastructure. So I'll keep on trying to explain that this isn't just an installation. We're not purely just giving you a delivered scripted installation of a different component. We have that full suite integration. So specifically when we talk around the entire cloud management platform, every single component is integrated as it should be. We have service reporting integrated into both Ops Manager and Virtual Machine Manager, as well as presenting it back into the Windows Azure pack. We have the different interactions from things like Orchestrator into Service Manager or Service Manager into Orchestrator and the other components, as well as things like the common config manager collections. Different things like identifying which operating systems you have, whether there is Exchange server collections, SQL servers, giving you stuff that you would normally do after the installation, including things like pre-packaging applications ready to deploy. So taking a lot of the common stuff that you'd have to build up in preparation for deploying out an individual task sequence, things like the VC++ runtimes, whether you need application virtualization if you're an MDOP user, Microsoft Office, all the common items packaged with their pre-dependencies and their discoveries ready for use. As I mentioned very briefly, they're task sequences, giving you our experience and knowledge to pre-deliver custom task sequences for delivering things like Windows 7 and Windows 8 that gives you that step up to start building from rather than just looking at a very empty console. And then we go on with different things like the logical networks defined correctly with all the different building blocks with the uplink profiles, port profiles. Virtual machines are already there as templates, as well as things like these service templates for deploying out Microsoft workloads like SharePoint and SQL. A lot of the management packs are imported for Operations Manager, as well as the common tuning that we've seen time and time again when doing this over the number of years. And then we have the base management packs and automation for things like Service Manager to deliver a lot of the common requests again, as well as a lot more custom reports and dashboards, things like ITSM dashboards where we can see how we're actually performing as a service, through to beginning of day and availability reports in Operations Manager, plus a lot more. So why PowerON platforms compared to some of the other ways of doing that? One of the things that we always tend to talk around is what are the main key drivers for doing or that affect delivery of different projects. We talk around about cost, specifically is usually that inhibitor across the different options, and then time and risk is the actual main points that drive the different engagement types. What is the most important things to your business between the time and risk? As we talk about the different methods of delivery, being either that it's sort of internal delivery mechanism that can have a very high overhead, you still need to consider things like the actual hardware costs that the platform is going to sit on, as opposed to either going out and doing it through that sort of standard consultancy method versus ours. So our internal overhead really is a lot lower than most. We're just doing interactions with the different teams on the initial piece in terms of the design, and then it's a training element. We're not spending months on site actually having to bother your staff and drag them into conversations as we're actually clicking buttons to deploy. Obviously the delivery timeline with PowerON platforms is a lot lower. We talk around about a 2-month logistical delivery timeline. So this is to say from the point of ordering, organising workshops, gathering information and being able to actually get on site to deliver it. The actual delivery itself as such is a lot lower. I mean, we can see from previous examples that 1 hour 6 minutes for an implementation of the actual software itself through to just a few hours of actually racking and stacking hardware. And the other very significant thing is the risk is a lot lower. So the business impact is very low because we're not so much driving any major change within the organization in terms of things that we're clicking and getting wrong. The actual reduced adoption and the project failure is very, very low. So this idea of starting this project, people changing, roles changing, ideas and actual importance changing halfway through projects, and it taking a while to actually start showing the business what it is that we're delivering, with PowerON, we have that ability right from the beginning of the engagement almost. We can show back to the business the actual benefits and they can start using it and driving the adoption of the actual investment that we've made. So it's fairly significant to say that from a cost impact, we can be as much as 16% more, less, sorry, or option 1 is 16% more versus us, and the standard traditional way can be a lot higher. So we're running pretty much ahead of time at the minute. I can talk very quickly at the best of times. We'll just move over to some quick questions and answers. Please feel free to either put them in the chat window or I can unmute you all now very briefly. Hopefully there's not too much background noise if anyone does want to speak up. So I'll take the one in chat until somebody jumps in. System support integration of Active Directory for deploy process. Yes, Angela, is this related to some of the service accounts, etc., that are required and the various permissions? I'll presume that is a yes because I think you're furiously typing away. So in terms of interaction with your internal Active Directories, so we have two approaches. The fast tracks, which are designed to be deployed directly within your organization on your infrastructure and your Active Directory. Part of these setup routines can automate all of the Active Directory service accounts, groups, permissions that are required. If an organization doesn't like to take that approach, then we have a big prerequisite pack where we basically explain every interaction that needs to be set up before we come in and do it. If we're taking more of the appliance model, then we run these within their own isolated domains, and then we look at doing the Forest Trust for setup point, and then manage them back in from the external domain, just looking at either similar groups to drop the accounts into or mirroring accounts. I hope that answers your question, Angela. Is there any more questions from anybody else? I'll take the resounding silence as a no. So I've just popped you back on mute for a minute. If you do have any more questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. We have got my colleague Harry on the line as well, so he can be looking at that chat window in case there is anything that I miss while I'm talking away. So just continue. So what do we actually need to think about what the next steps are for yourselves? So I'd certainly recommend we have a couple of options. This could be around either a test drive or what we call a solutions alignment. So the solutions alignment workshop is designed for us to actually work with your internal teams, any solution architects that you have, start looking at what your objectives of management is in general, and then start to build out this both short, medium and long-term plan for how both the delivery should be done and what we call enablement in terms of getting your internal staff up to speed with the technologies. So this isn't just a one-time drop as such. This is about actually exploring the long-term solution that a cloud management platform would give you. This isn't just to identify, oh yes, fine, we could do a Windows 7 deployment, right, fine, and off you go and not explore what the rest of the toolset could do. It's about managing and gaining the maximum benefit out of all of the features available where they make sense within your business. The test drive option, this is actually utilizing some of the PowerON platform solutions, and actually brings in a production level proof of concept with very low overhead and cost in terms of both the time it takes to deploy it. We can drop these in very quickly and rapidly within your infrastructure, and you can start to utilize them and start to see what impact and whether this technology is the right thing to adopt within your organization. So if either of these are of any interest, or just general conversations, and even so much as going deeper into some of the different products, such as components, system centers of product, the components such as Service Manager, and understanding how the different ITIL workflows work, or whether the monitoring aspect down to line of code management is actually of any good for yourselves, please feel free to either reach out to your account managers with your various different providers, or directly to ourselves where it makes sense if you don't have the contacts with suppliers that can help you. Well, I'd like to thank you very much for attending. We're slightly ahead of time, so you can have an extra 5 minutes back in your day. Unless there's any more questions, in which case I can take people off mute if needed. But if not, again, thank you very, very much for attending, and I'll hang on again for a few more minutes just to make sure that I do mop up any last questions. Thank you very much.